In his middle school yearbook, they opened it up. His Japanese classmates had written, "Go back to where you belong. I hate you. You smell like kimchi." He was telling us a story about from 1910 to 1945, the Koreans in Japan came to Japan because Japan colonized Korea. And when they were colonizing Korea, many Koreans were brought in forcibly, and some of them came voluntarily as economic migrants. They were just poor immigrants, and they were doing jobs that nobody wanted to do in Japan. And they stayed for multiple reasons: the Korean War, the division of the country, lots of reasons. However, during that time, they were really considered second-class citizens, and unfortunately, even today, Koreans in Japan really suffer under a suspicion of being very sketchy people. They're considered to be criminal, dirty, untrustworthy, and very often have poor hygiene. Even today. I took a shower today. But all this was happening, and as I was hearing this from the missionary, I thought, well, that's kind of sad, but I was a history major, so I knew everything, and I figured, it's just another sad story. But then he told us a story about a boy who was in his parish, who was 13 years old. And the little boy, who was in middle school, who had just graduated middle school, climbed up to the apartment building where he lived, and he jumped off to his death. And his parents were naturally devastated because they could not understand what would compel a 13-year-old boy to wish to die. So they went through his things and they found his middle school yearbook. And in his middle school yearbook, they opened it up. His Japanese classmates had written, "Go back to where you belong. I hate you. You smell like kimchi." And they wrote the words, "Die, die, die." And that story changed my life. And I'll tell you why it changed my life. It changed my life because I'm an American citizen, and I'm a naturalized American citizen. English is not my first language. And throughout my life, had it not been for the kindness of strangers, had it not been for teachers who believed in me, I would not be here. And it shocked me to think that unlike in America, despite the headlines today, that people could hate children because of their ethnic heritage. So, I tucked that story into my heart, and I could not let it go. However, in 1990, I was still a nice immigrant girl, and I went to law school. And I went to law school, and I practiced for 2 years being a corporate lawyer, and I was really good because I'm very good at doing homework. And I was like a due diligence queen. Like, I was the kind of kid that you want on your deal because I would read every document. And I would come back and say, "Oh, I found this little problem with the contract, like you have to fix it and we'll save our clients $15,000. And I would get a pat on the head and more boxes. And what happened was that I had a liver disease that I had had since I was 16, and my doctors were saying that I was really sick. And I'm okay now. So please do not be alarmed. But they said that I would get cancer in my early 20s. And I thought to myself, well, how do I want to spend my life? And I thought that I would write a book because it's so easy to write books. So my husband, who's here, we had $15,000 saved. And I thought, that'll last me a really long time. And I'm going to write that book, and I'm going to sell that book, and then I'm going to become famous and rich. And that didn't happen. It took me 12 years to publish my first book. From 1995 to 1996, I wrote a book, and it was sent out, and it was called The Revival of the Senses. And you will never see that book. Despite the incredibly pretentious title, it was a terrible book, and it was terrible because, as my husband said, it was boring. I love you, Chris. I can respond in love. And Then in 1996 to 2003, I thought I'm going to write about the Koreans in Japan because that is an important story. So I should focus my time on doing things that are important if I have given up money and status and security. So I focused on that book. And I wrote it, and I did all the research. Like, I know everything about the Koreans in Japan. Like, you can ask me anything. And I wrote that book, and again, it was terrible because it wasn't a novel. Like, it didn't have these characters that we needed to make you want to pay $27 or turn the pages, more importantly, to turn the pages. So I studied a lot more about what I wanted to do, and I put that book aside, and one day I was on the subway, which is my primary mode of transportation, and I was reading because it's a great way to pass the time in the subway. And I finished this book by V.S. Naipaul, who is confirmedly a racist, sexist dog. However, he wrote a very beautiful, like compelling novel called A House for Mr. Biswas. And when I finished it, I burst into tears, and you know I have a crying problem. And people are staring at me. And when I finished it, I realized that I was really upset. I was really upset because he had the courage to write about people that he grew up with. And I thought, oh, I'm going to do that. So then I wrote Free Food for Millionaires. So from 1997 until, golly, this is so embarrassing. So from 2003 to 2007, I wrote Free Food for Millionaires, and that book became my first book. But my first book is actually my third book. And then in 2007, my husband got this really good job, and then we needed the money. So we moved to Japan, but I didn't want to move to Japan. And then also, I didn't want to get a new husband. Because for you out there who are married, you know, it's not easy to find a good spouse. And I didn't have any other takers. So I said, okay, I'll go, and I'll try to be a decent parent and a decent spouse. But my consolation was that I could return to the book about the Koreans in Japan.